My ex didn't just break my heart. They tried to bury me under the ruins of my own life. My name is Alex. I am 37 years old. And this isn't a story about a simple breakup. It's about a betrayal so complete, so profoundly calculated, that it almost cost me everything. My name, my savings, my sanity. You think you know the person you sleep next to, the one you whisper your dreams to in the dark. You trust them with your keys, your secrets, your heart. I did. And that trust became the very weapon my ex, Leah, used to try and erase me, all to escape the consequences of her own disastrous choices. This is the story of how I clawed my way back from a chasm of deceit, and how I took back the one thing she couldn't steal, my truth. It was a Tuesday in October, one of those perfectly, painfully ordinary days that you only appreciate in hindsight. The sky over Portland was its usual shade of determined gray, a light drizzle misting the window of my small home office. And the only drama in my life was a looming deadline for a graphic design project and a lukewarm cup of tea I kept forgetting to drink. The gentle hum of my laptop, the distant drone of city traffic, these were the sounds of my predictable safe world. A world I had carefully rebuilt in the 6 months since Leah had moved out. My phone buzzed, vibrating against a stack of sketch pads. It was an unknown number, a New York area code. It was probably another cold caller, trying to sell me something I didn't need. I almost ignored it, my cursor already hovering over the decline button. But something, a flicker of professional obligation perhaps, made me answer. Hello, Alex Reed speaking. Good afternoon, Mr. Reed. The voice on the other end was clipped, professional, and utterly devoid of warmth. My name is David Chun. I'm calling from the Fraud Investigation Unit at Chase headquarters. My stomach did a slow cold roll. Fraud. I think you might have the wrong number. I don't bank with Chase. It was a simple fact. I'd been with Bank of America since I was 16. There was a pause, the sound of keyboard clicks echoing faintly down the line. Sir, our records show you opened a Sapphire Premier account with us on August 15th of this year, at our Wall Street branch. You also successfully applied for an associated line of credit for $50,000. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. No, that's impossible. I haven't been to New York in over a year. I certainly haven't opened any bank accounts. My voice was steady, but my heart had begun to hammer against my ribs, like a trapped bird. I understand this may be confusing, Mr. Reed. Mr. Chun continued, his tone unmoved. The reason for my call is that the account is now overdrawn by $38,742. The credit line has been almost fully exhausted, and several large cash withdrawals were made from ATMs in Atlantic City last week. We've been trying to contact you for several days via the listed correspondence address in New Jersey. New Jersey. Atlantic City. It felt like he was reading from someone else's biography, a twisted version of a life I'd never lived. There's been a massive mistake, I said, the words catching in my throat. I stood up, pacing the small space between my desk and the window. The city outside suddenly felt alien, menacing. Someone has clearly stolen my identity. That is a possibility we are exploring, Mr. Chun said calmly. However, the account was opened with what appears to be a valid driver's license and a utility bill in your name for the New Jersey address. Can you confirm your date of birth for me, sir? For security. I gave him my date of birth, my mind racing faster than my words. A driver's license. My license was in my wallet, right here in my pocket. A utility bill. How could anyone possibly have a utility bill in my name for a place I'd never even visited? Thank you, that matches, he said. The reason this has been escalated to our unit, Mr. Reed, isn't just the debt. The funds were used to purchase high-end electronics, which were then flagged as being resold through suspicious channels. Furthermore, a payment of $10,000 was made from the account to an online gambling site that is currently under federal investigation for money laundering. We are legally obligated to report this activity to the National Crime Agency. The floor fell away. This wasn't just a simple case of credit card fraud anymore. The words, money laundering and National Crime Agency echoed in the silent room. Monstrous and surreal. It felt like I was being implicated in a serious crime. A character in a gritty TV drama I had no desire to watch, let alone star in. This is insane, I whispered, sinking into my chair. This isn't me. You have to believe me. Mr. Reed. His voice softened almost imperceptibly, a sliver of practiced empathy. We need you to come into your local branch with 2 forms of ID as soon as possible to file an official fraud report. We will also need you to contact the police. Do you understand? I mumbled something affirmative, my mind a snowstorm of panic. He gave me a reference number, a string of letters and digits that sounded like a prison sentence. And then he was gone. I sat there, holding the dead phone, the silence of the room roaring in my ears. The mundane Tuesday was shattered, its fragments lying around my feet. The dread was no longer a slow roll. It was a tidal wave, pulling me under. In that moment, I felt a terror so profound it was physical, a cold dread that seeped into my bones. My name, my identity, the very definition of who I was, had been stolen and twisted into a grotesque caricature of a criminal, and I had absolutely no idea by whom or why. The next 48 hours were a blur of fluorescent lights, hold music, and the weary, skeptical faces of strangers. I went to my bank, the police station, and spent hours on the phone to credit reference agencies, repeating my story over and over until the words lost all meaning. It wasn't me. I don't know how this happened. It wasn't me. Each time, I was met with a mixture of bureaucratic sympathy and thinly veiled suspicion. I was a problem to be processed, a case file to be logged. To them, I was just a name attached to a mountain of debt and a string of suspicious transactions. Guilty until proven innocent. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. My mind was a frantic looping reel of possibilities. Was it a sophisticated hacking syndicate? A random data breach? I changed every password I owned, shredded old documents, and looked at my neighbors with a new paranoid lens. The world had become a hostile place. I felt exposed, violated, and utterly alone. The turning point came on Thursday night. I was sitting on my sofa, staring at a stack of mail, mostly final demand notices addressed to Mr. Alex Reed at my actual address, which had clearly been updated by the perpetrator. One was from a high-end catalog company for a gold watch costing over $5,000. Despair was a physical weight on my chest. I needed proof, something concrete to show the police that this wasn't just me trying to dodge a debt I'd racked up. I started thinking about the documents Mr. Chun had mentioned, a driver's license and a utility bill. My license was still safely in my wallet. A forgery then, but a good one. And the utility bill. How? They'd need access to my details, my personal information, deep, intimate information. And then like a lightning strike in the dark, a memory surfaced. It was from about a year ago, when Leah and I were still together. We were applying for a mortgage, a process that involved excavating every corner of our financial lives. We'd sat at the kitchen table for a whole weekend, surrounded by piles of paper, bank statements, payslips, tax returns, and scans of our licenses and social security cards. We'd saved it all to a shared cloud drive for easy access. After we broke up, the mortgage application was forgotten. The shared dream dissolved. But the drive, had I ever deleted that folder? My hands trembled as I powered up my old laptop, the one we used to share. I navigated to the cloud service, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. And there it was, a folder labeled Mortgage App. I clicked it open, and inside, another folder, one I hadn't created. It was titled Contingency. My blood ran cold. Inside Contingency was a meticulous collection of my life. A high-resolution scan of my driver's license, a copy of my social security card, PDFs of my birth certificate, bank statements from 2 years ago, which included my account numbers and routing numbers. And there, in a subfolder named Templates. I found it. A photoshopped PG&E utility bill. It was a perfect replica, but the address had been changed to a random apartment in New Jersey, and the date was recent. I felt like I was going to be sick. It was her. It had to be her. Leah, the woman I had loved. The woman I had planned a future with. The woman who, after our breakup, had cried and told me she'd always be my friend. The why crashed into me with the force of a physical blow. Leah had always been a dreamer, a schemer. She'd quit her steady job a few months before we split to launch a revolutionary tech startup. She'd poured all her savings into it. And I now realized with a nauseating certainty, probably a lot of money she didn't have. She was always vague about the finances, talking about venture capital and angel investors. Our breakup had been messy, precipitated by her increasing secrecy and erratic behavior. She'd accused me of not believing in her, of being too cautious, too boring. She'd left in a storm of righteous indignation, claiming she needed to be free of my negativity to succeed. The truth, I now saw, was far uglier. Her business had failed. She must have been drowning in debt, her grand dreams turning to ash. She was facing ruin, personal and professional accountability for her catastrophic failure. And she had found a way out. A scapegoat. She wouldn't go down for her own mistakes. She would drag me down instead. She would use the identity of the person who once loved her to create a new financial entity, load it with her debts and fraudulent activities, and then let it burn, leaving me in the wreckage. The red flags were suddenly blindingly obvious, no longer subtle. The time she lost her wallet and needed me to give her all my bank details again, to set me back up on her system. The way she'd insisted on handling all our paperwork for the mortgage application, claiming I was too disorganized. The oddly specific questions about my mother's maiden name and my first pet, disguised as nostalgic conversation. Each memory was now tainted, a puzzle piece in a horrifying picture of premeditated betrayal. Staring at the screen, at the cold, clinical evidence of her deception, I felt no sadness. The love I had for her curdled into something cold and hard and sharp. This wasn't a desperate act from a broken woman. This was a calculated execution of my character. She had built an escape hatch out of my life, my name, my future. And as the initial shock gave way to a slow-burning rage, I knew one thing for sure. She was not going to get away with it. The days that followed were a descent into a labyrinthine hell of Leah's making. With the grim discovery on the cloud drive, I now had the key, and every door it opened revealed a new level of her treachery. She hadn't just taken out a loan. She had methodically and maliciously woven a new identity for me. A phantom Alex Reed who was reckless, extravagant, and criminally minded. Her method was a terrifying blend of digital savvy and intimate knowledge. The shared cloud drive was her arsenal. She'd used the high-quality scan of my license and the forged utility bill to pass the Know Your Customer checks required to open the Chase account online. She'd been clever, choosing a bank I had no history with to avoid internal red flags. The correspondence address in New Jersey was a mail forwarding service, a ghost address that would bounce any physical letters into oblivion, ensuring I'd be kept in the dark for as long as possible. She knew my life inside out. She used our old dog's name, Buster, combined with my year of birth, as the password for the new account, a combination I'd used years ago for an old email account, a detail I'd shared with her one lazy Sunday morning. It was a cruel personal touch. She was using our shared memories as tools to dismantle my life. The specific charges she'd pinned on me were designed for maximum damage. The $50,000 line of credit wasn't spent on a single large purchase that might be easily traced and reversed. Instead, it was a chaotic spray of transactions designed to create a profile of an unstable spendthrift. There were thousands spent on designer clothes, from brands I'd never wear, and weekends at luxury hotels in seaside towns I'd never visited. She bought that $5,000 gold watch, not to wear, but to sell immediately for cash, a classic move for someone trying to liquidate credit quickly. Then came the more sinister layer. The $10,000 payment to the blacklisted gambling site was a masterstroke of malice. It wasn't just about the money, it was about reputation. It immediately moved my case from a standard fraud file to one with potential links to organized crime. It was designed to make the authorities see me not as a victim, but as a clumsy amateur trying to lie my way out of trouble. She was poisoning the well, ensuring that anyone who looked into Alex Reed would see a portrait of a man spiraling out of control. But the emotional toll was the heaviest burden. It was a constant, low-grade fever of anxiety that never broke. Every time the phone rang, my stomach would clench. Every brown envelope that landed on my doormat sent a jolt of panic through me. I started to feel like a stranger in my own life. I'd walk down the street and wonder if people were looking at me, judging the man they thought was a debtor, a fraud, maybe even a criminal. My work suffered. How could I focus on color palettes and font types when my entire identity was under siege? I had to tell my boss, a kind woman named Sarah, a watered-down version of events. She was supportive, but I saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes. It was the same look I saw in the mirror. A sliver of my own mind started to question myself. Was I going mad? Could I have done these things and somehow forgotten? The gaslighting was so complete, it was starting to work on me. The shame was suffocating. I withdrew from my friends, embarrassed and unable to articulate the sheer insanity of my situation. How do you explain that the woman they all liked, the charming, ambitious Leah, who they'd shared dinners and holidays with, was methodically trying to ruin you? It sounded vindictive. It sounded like the ravings of a bitter ex-boyfriend. One evening, my sister called. "Alex, I just had a call from a debt collection agency," she said, her voice tight with worry. "They said they were looking for you. They mentioned court action. What on earth is going on?" Leah had listed her as an emergency contact on one of the credit applications. She had deliberately and callously dragged my family into her web. Explaining it to her, hearing the confusion and fear in her voice, was one of the lowest points. The deception wasn't just digital, it was seeping into the real world, contaminating my most important relationships. I felt utterly cornered, framed by a ghost that wore my face and knew all my secrets. The feeling of public shame was no longer a fear, it was my new reality. She hadn't just stolen my identity, she'd stolen my credibility, leaving me alone in a prison of her lies. The rage that had been simmering within me finally boiled over. The phone call with my sister was the breaking point. The shame and despair curdled into a cold, hard resolve. Leah had underestimated me. She'd mistaken my kindness for weakness. She thought I would crumble, that I'd be too broken or too embarrassed to fight back. She was wrong. This was no longer just about clearing a debt. It was a battle for my name, my reputation, and my future. My first step was to get organized. I bought a large ring binder and several dividers, labeling them police report, bank correspondence, credit agencies, evidence. I turned my anxiety into action, channeling my fear into proper record keeping. Every phone call was logged with the date, time, name of the person I spoke to, and a summary of the conversation. Every letter was scanned, every email printed. My apartment, once a creative space, became a war room. Armed with the files from the cloud drive, I went back to the police. This time, I wasn't just a panicked victim with a confusing story. I was a man with evidence. I met with a detective named Miller, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s. I laid everything out on her desk. The printouts of the scanned license, the photoshopped utility bill, the file structure of the contingency folder. I explained my relationship with Leah, the mortgage application, the breakup. For the first time, I saw a flicker of belief in an official's eyes. She used a shared cloud drive. She asked, her pen scribbling furiously in her notepad. "That's sloppy. But the forgery is good. Very good." She took my official statement, a process that took over 3 hours. It was emotionally draining, recounting the intimacy of my relationship with Leah and reframing it as a long con. But with every word, I felt a piece of my power returning. The legal hurdles were immense. The bank, while now more cooperative, was a slow-moving behemoth. Removing the fraudulent markers from my credit file was like trying to unscramble an egg. It was a bureaucratic nightmare of automated phone systems and departments that didn't talk to each other. "We need the official police report," one would say. "We can't release the report until the investigation is active," the police would counter. I was trapped in a Kafkaesque loop of corporate and legal procedure. My first small victory came a week later. Detective Miller called. "We got a warrant for the mail forwarding service in New Jersey, and we pinged the IP address that accessed your cloud drive in the last 6 months. Got a consistent hit from a residential address in Santa Barbara." "Santa Barbara?" I asked, my heart leaping. "That's where her parents live." "Exactly," she said. "We also pulled CCTV from the ATMs in Atlantic City. It's grainy, but the person making the withdrawals matches your ex-partner's general description. We're building a case, Alex. It's slow, but we're getting there." That phone call was a lifeline. It was the first external validation that I wasn't crazy. But the fight was far from over. The setbacks were just as frequent. I had to hire a solicitor to help me deal with the debt collectors, which cost money I barely had. One of the credit card companies she'd opened an account with sold the debt to a third-party agency before the fraud claim was processed. And the new agency was ruthless, threatening me with bailiffs and court orders. The stress was relentless. There were nights I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart racing, the weight of it all pressing down on me. The emotional drain was perhaps the hardest part. I had to prove my innocence, but to do that, I had to expose the most intimate details of my past relationship. I had to explain to strangers how the woman I once planned to marry had systematically betrayed me. It was a constant reopening of a wound that had no chance to heal. One of the biggest breakthroughs came from my own detective work. Racking my brain for any detail, I remembered Leah was obsessed with a specific type of rare, expensive coffee from a small, independent roaster in Santa Barbara. On a hunch, I checked the transaction list from the fraudulent Chase account again. There it was, a $45 charge. A tiny, insignificant purchase buried amongst thousands of dollars of high-end fraud. But it was her. It was a habit, a personal signature she'd been too arrogant to conceal. When I passed that detail to Detective Miller, she was impressed. "It's the little things that trip them up," she said. "The vanity purchases, it helps us place her in Santa Barbara at a specific time, making a purchase with the card she claims isn't hers." The mountain in front of me was still huge, but for the first time, I felt like I was climbing, instead of sliding backwards. Each piece of evidence, each small win, was a foothold. It was an arduous, soul-destroying process, but I was no longer just a victim. I was a fighter, battling for the one thing that was truly mine, my name. The final act of the drama unfolded, not with a dramatic courtroom showdown, but with a quiet, decisive click of handcuffs. Detective Miller called me on a gray December morning. "We've got her, Alex," she said, her voice calm and professional. "We executed a warrant at her parents' address in Santa Barbara an hour ago. She didn't put up a fight. We found the laptop she used, some of the electronics purchased with the fraudulent cards, and the gold watch. She confessed to everything." Relief washed over me, in a wave so powerful it made my knees weak. It was over. The fight was actually over. But there was no elation, no triumphant cheer. Just a profound, hollowed-out exhaustion. And a deep, lingering sadness for the woman I once loved and the person she had become. Leah's day in court came 3 months later. I chose not to attend. I didn't need to see her. I submitted a victim impact statement, detailing not just the financial cost, but the emotional and psychological devastation she had wrought. She was sentenced to 2.5 years in prison for fraud and identity theft. The judge called her actions a gross and predatory breach of trust. Justice had been served, at least on paper. The legal consequences for Leah were clear, but the consequences for me were a tangled mess that took almost another year to fully unravel. With the criminal conviction, the banks finally, officially, wrote off the debts. I worked with a nonprofit that helps victims of identity theft to painstakingly clear my name with the credit reference agencies. I had to send copies of the court verdict and police reports to dozens of companies. It was a slow, frustrating process of erasing the phantom Alex Reed that Leah had created. The experience forced me to become an expert in my own security. I implemented crucial steps that I now consider non-negotiable. I use a password manager to generate unique, complex passwords for every single online account. I have two-factor authentication enabled on everything, from my email to my social media. I shredded years of old documents and switched to paperless billing for everything. I check my credit report every month without fail. Most importantly, I learned a harsh lesson about the porous boundary between physical and digital trust. The cloud drive, once a symbol of our shared future, had become a weapon. I now compartmentalize my digital life with the same caution one would use for a physical safe. But the most profound lessons weren't about passwords or credit scores. I learned about the true nature of trust. I had believed that love meant total transparency, a complete merging of lives. I now know that healthy boundaries are not a sign of distrust, but a sign of self-respect. You can love someone deeply without giving them the keys to every part of your kingdom. I also learned about my own resilience. Leah thought she could break me, bury me under a mountain of her own making. She tried to turn my name into a synonym for failure and deceit. But she failed. In fighting back, in wading through the bureaucracy and the emotional wreckage, I discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. I had to become my own advocate, my own detective, and my own savior. My narrative is no longer defined by her betrayal. It's defined by my response to it. I reclaimed my name, my finances, and my peace of mind. The scars are still there, of course. A shadow of caution now touches all my relationships, and a part of me will always mourn the naive trust Alex once had. But I am not broken. I am wiser, stronger, and more fiercely protective of the life I have so painstakingly rebuilt. My name is Alex Reed, and this time, the story attached to it is one of survival, resilience, and the quiet, unshakable power of taking back your own truth.